People often talk about the blade system and how effective it is, but it's not always made clear exactly what that is. I wanted to take a look at that. Now, one of the things that it definitely is their T-pistols. Now, pistols are a bit random. It's hard to be very consistent on them, but Navi have something like a 70 or 75% win rate on T-pistols in 2024 over like 110 pistol rounds, which is a pretty solid sample size. And I think it comes down a lot to anti-stratting. And I think Blade is the best anti-stratter we have in CS currently, or at least it's hard to see his equal because there's so many small things that he picks up on that you probably don't notice. And in a different video, I'll link it in the description, Austin actually referenced this video on a Thorin podcast. One of the things I noticed is that when G2 picked up Snacks, the first event they had him, before the final, where they played Navi, they played Nuke twice. And Navi, in those two games in one event, they found that Snacks was, when top what was mollied, he would wait out the molly and then smoke Squeaky, whereas a lot of other teams will smoke Squeaky from sight. And they, for the final, made an exec that mollied top hut and then popped out Squeaky in the 3 or 4 seconds of downtime when there's no molly and no smoke. Just imagine the type of adjustments they're making against a team like Spirit that they know they're very likely to play against, and they, Spirit play a pretty consistent style. Imagine the type of things that we're not even able to really tell are done as anti-strats that they're doing. Now, it's funny I talked about T-Pistol because it looks like Navi are actually going to lose this one. They had a decent idea of what they wanted to do, it seemed like, but they simply weren't ready for that flash in towards ramp at the very beginning. Unlucky. I actually haven't seen this game before, and then they just go into what is, a slow second round, fairly default. They have the Deagle on Alexa B, P250 on Bit, and it seems like if they get a kill, they're willing to buy up a Deagle on that player. I think in Pugs, generally, you want to be... In general, I almost never want to see full saves when I watch people in Pugs because P250s are simply too effective, and I don't think you need perfect utility when it comes to a Pug, right? Whereas in a pro game, then you probably want to have that extra little bit of utility if you can. But heading into the first gun round, this is where things actually matter. T-side Mirage, definitely one of the best maps for Navi, and they actually get countered a little bit here. I mean, their T side, they end up getting 5 rounds. So after losing pistol, I mean, going 5-5 from the first gun round out isn't bad, but when it comes down to it, you're typically looking at Navi as a team that gets, they might get 6 in this situation. And Spirit have been struggling a bit on Mirage as well. Now, one of the things they do is they do a really solid job of, they definitely don't take a ton of utility damage in mid. Navi, my favorite thing about Navi is just how good they are at utility. I think it's surprising how many mistakes I think teams make with utility in terms of like just bad nades that aren't effective, or like bad timing on nades, or just utility that gives slight tells as to what's coming. Whereas Navi are very consistent in having all of their protocols down, which is the type of thing that made Astralis so dangerous, right? And one of the things that allows to make your opponents kind of unclear as to what exactly you're doing, and make the lurks coming out from Bit even more effective because you never really have a decent idea of the exact setup that Navi's going for. This time they've got Ime in Underpass, they've got the ramp hit coming out, and then Bit tries to activate out of Palace knowing that he needs to make contact, doesn't get anything done. It's Ime from Underpass that actually gets a kill. And it's 4v4 right off the bat. You'll notice that the A-hit kind of got stuffed, right? They're actually not in that great of a position. They didn't have a ton of utility to go for this hit either, but they stop, delay. They know they have a bit of time because of that lurk coming in. They can molly under balcony, take down Chopper, and although the rotate is coming in, Ime finds the timing still, even after being spotted in middle. If Shiro and Donk had got those kills, Ime still would have been coming up behind them because the timing is so uncertain, and Navi put so many question marks as to what exactly is going on throughout the map. It's very hard for teams to actually, read and adjust into what they can be doing. They kind of pull teams in different directions at the same time, which is what, every team is trying to do. But they kind of just, honestly, it feels like they just do it a little bit better. So, Bit towards B here, listening for the jump spot. One of the things that this does require is, for this to work perfectly, you can do this fine, and plenty of players do this, but you do often want to have some resources if you can, especially if you have confidence in this lurker. And Navi have a lot of confidence in Bit when he goes for this pick to actually set up where you want at least one other player over here. So you don't want to full commit because maybe there's nobody jump spotting, or maybe you just don't get the kill or whatever. But you want to have another player over here, so if Bit does get this kill, that they can actually react into B in time and not, you know, not have any problems with that. And so Bit really does just kind of pug out towards B. He takes the shot, he jumps on the ledge. This is something you see in pugs all the time. And then he's actually just going to activate on his own. You know, he's got support from JL, but they know the buy here from Spirit is just not all that great. And I think Shiro's already popped the shot off. Yeah, he has. So they know the op isn't going to be here necessarily in time to get anything done, and they can have Bit kind of just walk around and look for something. Then if he does get the kill, again, you've got JL here to support. If Bit gets that kill, JL can pop out and they can actually make this site hit happen, but they still have the option of canceling that if they want. And in this case, they don't need to because they get the initial kill and the mid hit goes well at the same time. So already you've got a 2-2, already you've got Spirit back onto the pistols, onto the eco, and Navi are feeling like they're in a decent amount of control. Now, the question that I've kind of considered is like, why exactly is it that Navi have struggled so hard against Spirit, right? Because they've lost the last 3 or 4 series against Spirit. And if you listen to a lot of analysts, I've seen, I can't remember who it was, a coach for a top team, and a couple of players actually as well have said, tactically, Spirit is one of the worst teams in the top 20. And I think I generally agree with that. I think that Chopper is a great kind of fundamental IGL, I suppose, and that he's really good at the mind games, kind of the same way Kerrigan is, where, you know, they're really good at kind of expecting what your opponents are going to go for, what setup they're going to be playing, how they're going to react to losing certain rounds, and kind of playing that mind game to a pretty high level. But at the same time, Spirit does a lot of the same things over and over, and that means that they are, and I've seen it from Mouse, they are certainly counter-stratable in a lot of situations and can be exploited. And I'm not sure if Navi have just maybe not seen that, or they've maybe just not wanted to go all in on counter-strats in the past. But this round, we have Bit going for a fast play through this smoke here, just a change of pace. They've been playing quite slow in the last couple of rounds. This time around, you want to catch, especially because you're smoking off window pretty consistently. A lot of that time, that means you might have that window player. You might consider sending your opper towards connector. You might consider just like running straight to connector, especially if they've been playing slow and just swinging out. He only kills Donk, and he actually does get traded, but if you can catch Donk off guard and get the kill, that's all you really need to do. I mean, that's already put Spirit in a situation where they're relatively much less likely to actually win the round. I mean, Donk is their player, even if, you know, you can say whether they rely on him or not. Donk is the player that you take him off the server and you simply have a much better chance of winning the round. And at the same time, they were going very kind of like fast, but not rushing out A. They were taking a lot of space because they know the reaction that's likely to come out. They know Spirit is going to be trying to compensate over towards the A side. They know that off of mid control, the thing that you notice from Navi that's similar to FaZe at times, and that's why someone came up with a stat that's like your opening kill percentage, like how good are IGLs based on how much you get the entry on CT side, because I suppose that's supposed to be like how good your individuals are. I think a lot of teams, or specific teams, FaZe and Navi are great examples of this, do a very good job of like, they kind of set up a pretty solid opening kill for their entry fragger on T side. They set up a relatively solid opening kill, but not a guaranteed kill. Like, they're not setting it up where he's like, you know, he still has to take a bit of a duel, but they make sure that if that player dies, they're still getting something out of it. They're getting the information that allows the rest of the team to take some control and not take that away, and not lose that and just have the whole round crumble immediately with no backup plan. And at the same time, if the player does get a kill, it kind of amplifies the hit. And if we look at that previous round, where, you know, Bit goes up catwalk and then they're hitting out A, if Bit dies, he still gets information as to where the CTs on A are likely playing, what the connector player is doing. If Bit gets a kill, he gets that information, plus he probably draws some attention that makes the play out ramp even more effective, right? So whether it works or not, they're still giving themselves a pretty decent chance of making the strat operate, you know? That's the new top mid smoke, or I guess it's not even new at this point. That's just the current top mid smoke, right? That's been around for a while. Alexi B jumps across there, doesn't give Shiro the opening kill, and this is a buy if you look at it from Spirit. They've got an op and a FAMAS, right? So this is a buy that kind of relies on probably, I would guess, the surprise factor to some extent. Maybe they saved they did save the op and the FAMAS over, so they know they have the op most likely. But the surprise factor, at least of where that op actually is probably a big deal. Unfortunately, once that op is spotted, then you can kind of track it throughout the map. I mean, if enough time elapses, then that op can, of course, go anywhere. So it's not that you can necessarily know exactly where he is, but you can have a decent idea of taking some control of the map in that downtime. Like Ime coming through underpass pretty comfortably. They've got top mid control relatively comfortably. But at this point, this is where the op is now kind of a question mark. And you do have to wonder where it could be at any given time, or at this point in the round, and where it could rotate to at this point. The connector play, I actually really like that play. A lot of teams now, you throw that top con smoke and then you molly it, and they kind of edge that smoke. They get into this like little cubby here that's often, you can see through the smoke, but you're not getting hit by the molly. It actually becomes quite awkward. So I like this little play from Navi where they actually just get Ime up above it, and you can't really get off from Ticket here. If Shiro was Ticket, he would have to commit in quite heavily to actually get contact here. So Ime's in a pretty good spot, and they're coming through Palace at the same time. So one of the main positions that is best at dealing with Palace is, of course, like jungle and top con, right? And these are angles that are going to be worried about con now, right? And stairs, of course. These are angles that are going to be worried about con now, which means these players coming out of Palace are going to have a much better chance to actually come out and get contact positively and catch players off guard. Then Bit spots this player towards Ticket. That likely signifies that Chopper is towards ramp, and that gives a lot of space over towards Navi here to actually get things done. Then at this point, I think by this point, actually Shiro does kill JL. I was going to say, where else could Shiro be? He kind of has to be in towards window here in this situation, because, well, he has to have been B when this hit was going on. Otherwise, where could he be? If he was Cat, he probably would have made contact with Donk, so they can pretty much deduce exactly where he is. Oh my god. Okay. All right. I mean, yeah, okay. That's just reality, okay? That's like, holy shit. That's just reality. Okay, look, they could have flashed him, they could have smoked him off, but at the same time, Shiro is close range. If you give him time, you flash him off, he's going to reposition. He's already got a kill. He can reposition, get another kill, end up saving the op. I don't know. I feel like, in my mind, I probably would have tried to... They had a molly, didn't they? Couldn't they have just mollied him off? In my mind, they could have mollied him off, but at the same time, you're swinging on him close range with 3 players. I think it's reasonable to say that you're expecting that kill to go your way 99% of the time. That was an unbelievable play from Shiro. But heading into the following gun round, again, change of pace, going fast up Cat. They played slow, now they're going to speed it up. The initial kill onto Zontix, but you do have the quick rotate from Shiro to get over here in time, which is the key to this round, because Magix goes 1 for 1, and if Magix goes 1 for 1 and Shiro isn't here, then you have a 3v3 with B site control, and that's just a Navi round, right? But Shiro, the thing with great oppers is that if your opponents can track you throughout the map, you're not going to consistently pull off those plays that Shiro just did there. I mean, I think he like quickscoped this third kill. I think there was like some, there's some randomness in that, and your opponent could just shoot you in the head before you ever even have a chance to get the second shot. Great oppers, and this is why I kind of reject the idea that Simple wasn't someone that you should emulate at all later on in his career into like 2020, 2021, 2021 especially, for example, because your opponents are trying to avoid you. And so you have to have a good read on what is the most likely place for your opponents to be going. And if you can do that, the amount of support you can give to your teammates throughout the map in those situations is just unbelievable to win your team rounds. So, I mean, realistically, Navi should be up, 6-3. This should be like one gun round for Spirit since they won the pistol and the anti-ecos. Like, this is actually an incredibly well-played half so far by Navi, despite the fact that it's 5-4 for Spirit, and it's about to be 6-4. This is Navi firmly in control of this entire, I'd say this entire half, realistically. And Shiro is just kind of, he had one ridiculous individual play, and then he had one like big brain moment where he saw what was happening, he saw the likely rotation, and he prevented it. You know, he got into the site in the right time and prevented what would have been a very good situation for Navi. Then heading into the following gun round, you can kind of expect this type of thing to happen. They sped it up, it didn't work out, now they're going to slow it down. This is where it often is talked about how it's much easier to call when you're leading than when you're losing, because you can kind of see what your opponents have seen and try and counteract that. Navi doing the typical where oftentimes when you go for a default, you're not going to have a B lurker, because how often are the CTs pushing into upper B? It's not going to be very often. They can't afford to do that too often. They can get caught off guard. So you can kind of give up that space and use it towards this double A play, where you have Bit lurking Palace, you have JL lurking Ramp, and it can be very, very hard to deal with a double lurk A. It can be incredibly tough to deal with. Now, JL on the ledge here, if Chopper is a couple of feet forward, you crouch down, you can see the feet through, there's just like this little gap right at the top here, and they can see the feet. But Chopper is at the very back. I guess he's just not thinking about this, to be honest. Like, that's fair, because there's not really supposed to be someone up there. And I check it every time I ever go ramp, and almost never see someone there, because people know that they're really not supposed to be there. However, later on in the round, when you get to this point, this is where people do end up going there, so they can do exactly what JL did right there, where they end up going over there, they drop down, and they try and get the kill. And I wouldn't be surprised if Chopper actually thought that he could see that, but I think you just need to be below these stairs, and you can actually see that, and he would have had a clear idea that JL was there, and he would have been able to prevent that exact situation. But I think the problem is, if you're below these stairs, you might be visible from Palace, and that may be what he's trying to avoid. He's trying to make sure he's not visible from Palace so that he can turn around eventually and like clear that once in a while, and they can stay in this setup for a decent period of time. Now, as this mid control is going, there may be a point where it becomes likely that the op is somewhere other than here. Somewhere other than mid, potentially towards a ramp. Now, you'll watch off the contact. Not off the initial contact do they drop, but once they see the second contact in towards connector, that's when JL drops, catches Chopper coming out, and Bit was looking to get aggressive here. He gets his way up, and then okay, all right. I thought he just backed up. Before I remount, I didn't realize he got it. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. Okay, that's ridiculous. I mean, okay. So one of the things that Blade talks about in some of his interviews, he talks about the role of a playmaker, and you have to think about it like, okay, there's multiple ways to be lurking, right? There's a passive lurk and there's an aggressive lurk. Now, Blame F would be your traditional passive lurk, and that means that you're waiting for your teammates to make contact. Once your teammates make contact, you're playing off of that contact that's giving you the ability to potentially shoot players in the side, and that's generally how you want to be lurking the majority of the time, right? The majority of the time you want to be lurking like that, no matter what type of lurker you are. However, certain lurkers are going to be more or less likely to get aggressive and try and be the initial contact when rounds are going a certain way. And I think Bit has found essentially the happiest medium between an aggressive and a passive lurk. It seems like Bit has found, either by his own kind of talent, I suppose, or his own kind of game sense, or by, you know, Blade's intervention, he seems to have found the happiest medium between not going too aggressive where he's readable, but at the same time making it uncomfortable for players that they always have to be concerned that Bit could just walk out through this Palace smoke. That's something that Bit would occasionally, once in a while, maybe consider doing, depending on how the game is going and depending on how the half is going as well. Whereas you look at someone like Blame F, it's like, I can kind of feel the way he's playing. I can kind of tell the plays he's likely to be going for, as opposed to someone like Bit. But on the A site hold, Chopper is someone, Spirit are a team that like to play on the A site, and this is the type of thing that they likely have in their scouting report. And the more likely someone is to be playing on the A site, I think the more value you have in simply lurking through the Palace smoke when the A site hit is going, especially because they actually hear him. Then he can post up on towards bench. Great flash from Spirit, though, and that's a flash that, you know, everyone should be throwing, by the way. Just, like, small aside. I think Shiro goes back around. Who throws the flash? Is it Zontix must have thrown the flash, or maybe Donk threw it for himself. You can throw this flash above triple from basically anywhere. Donk's going to throw it for himself. You just toss it high. The idea is to land it kind of above the wall, above triple here. You land it like right here, and then you're going to be in a pretty good spot. Yeah, it just delays the push, right? It delays the control of the bomb site. And this is what you want. You want the bomb not to be planted once the smoke goes down, because then you have yourself a pretty reasonable situation to actually try and collapse on your opponents from multiple different angles and make it very uncomfortable for them to actually get the bomb down. And that's exactly what Spirit do. Despite being in, you know, a 3v4 once the site was in control of Navi, by the time the bomb gets planted, it's now a 1v2 for Alexi B. He's actually going to have to ace to win this round. And swinging together, Magic's, though, only on 5 health. Oh my god. Was he on 1 health? Did Alexi B not hit him a single time? He was on 1 health. I thought he was on 5. Okay, I'm going to be honest here. Am I going to be honest? Is this a situation where you want Shiro to keep the op? No. No? No. No. Maybe? No. No? You're just... How does Magic's win that? Okay, Alexi B, come on. You gotta win this. It's too bad. I mean, the first shot was quite nice. But then you have Magic's with a USP with 1 HP. I mean, I guess the reality is that Magic swung out first, right? So he's most likely to die. Alexi B chose to fight the second player, which makes a lot of sense. You let the first guy out, you fight the second player. Second player is more likely to be, like, less likely to be ready. The first player is less likely to be able to trade, swing back in the opposite direction. It makes lots of sense. I was just thinking, like, giving him the op, it's like, with 1 HP, you're not going out first with the op. You also can't hold the angle with the op because you're retaking. So, like, do you want him to have the op? But you're pulling the USP out. It's like, I suppose he's most likely to die, and then you actually have a reasonable gun for Shiro to swing around and get the trade. It's just unfortunate the way that actually played out for... well, I mean, it works out, but it's not supposed to play out like that. So here's the angle for Bit, by the way. This is like Stewie2K has a famous ace, I think, from this angle, and Donk makes it look easy, but I promise this is not easy. Plenty of times I've gotten like multi-kills from this position. It's just a very effective position. Your head is almost invisible. The idea behind that is your head is almost invisible. It's one of those angles where it's very hard to see your head. And you dodge a lot of flashes. You don't dodge every flash, obviously, but you do dodge a majority of the flashes that might be thrown out on an A hit, especially ones that land over top of Palace. And if they're coming out of Palace, you can drop down if you need to. But pistol round, in this case, goes the way of Navi. So split pistol rounds is kind of what you're... honestly, that's really what you're hoping for. You want split pistols if you want a game to be to actually be interesting and to be competitive. Flash from Ime, everyone should know this, although does that... Yeah, that bounces. Everyone should know not to throw that. You throw it slightly differently. You throw it right at the beginning of the round, basically, because you want it to pop for your mid-window player to peek out immediately. Because if your window player doesn't peek out immediately, then he can't see the cross to the boxes. And so if you throw a delayed flash, it's cool, but someone could be at boxes, and then you never really have true control of mid without also spending a molly, which is not nice, right? It's not something you necessarily want to be doing if you can help it. But this is going to be Spirit kind of doing something very similar to what we saw from Navi on that second round, which is going for the Glocks, having, I think, a couple of upgraded pistols, but you're really just looking to waste some utility, waste some time, if you can. Then you've got the double up in window. I actually really like this, especially as a second round play, doubling up in window, even before gun rounds. I think you end up dueling people in mid. In pugs, I really like this as a second round play because people have a tendency to swing out mid with deagles. You have 2 players in window, you're just gonna destroy them. And if you look at this from Spirit's perspective, Spirit, I think they waited for the initial utility throw, and then they're gonna look to go afterwards. Does Wonderful have a nade at the beginning of this? Yeah, Wonderful's here. Molly, then he's gonna nade the smoke. Once he nades the smoke, Spirit have like now a sense of safety. I think that they, there's no smoke there's no molly. Then there's the re-molly, keeps them out from the box, and then the nade, and you just have 2 people sitting here ready to fight anyone at top mid. And if you look at this from Donk's perspective, I mean, does he have a chance for anything? Even without a flash, I would guess they probably flash over 2 at the same time. He's just got no chance to do anything. And if you fight Donk with 2 players at the same time, I mean, Donk may be Donk, but he's still capable of dying, right, if you fight him with 2 players at once, and that's going to put yourself in the best situation you can hope for. Now, into this situation, you've got Bit, who's still in a pretty good spot, decides to throw the nade towards ramp, and then he's not, I mean, he's kind of almost screws himself with that nade. It's so hard to see through nades in CS2. I've gotten screwed by this so many times where they like peek past it. I mean, if you look at this from his perspective, how does he even see that player? Maybe he's got slightly different. It might. I think nades and Molotovs sometimes look a little bit different on GoTV than they do in the game. Because man, I couldn't see that guy at all. But maybe it's a setting thing. I don't know. But 5v3 off the bat, so another good opening to the round from Navi, which is, I think openings to the round is where you can really expect that Blade has, you know, the most input. Whereas in the mid round, he has some input, but, you know, players have to make plays. They have to have their own agency and their own ability to make the play that they think is right. So that's kind of a long-term thing where you try and make sure everyone's on the same page. When it comes to round openings, that's where Blade probably has the most input, and on average in this game, round opening wise, I think Navi have got the better of Spirit pretty much almost 100% of the time. Like, how many rounds does Spirit not win? How many rounds did Spirit win by something other than just a player popping off or like, you know, Navi whiffing or something? Like, it feels like every time Spirit has won a round, it's pretty much just been like Shiro with the 3K, Shiro with the good rotate into B. But I mean, even the beginning of that round with Shiro rotating into B, it was a 3v3, potentially with Navi having B site control, you know? And they had pushed them off mid as well. So the setup here, Navi just abandoning B. You know, on the short term, right, you can play from, if you have 2 people towards the bricks here and your opponents go for a B pop with pistols, you're just going to mow them down anyways. I mean, you could get smoked off, but generally you're still going to be in a pretty good position. General rule of thumb, by the way, for the most part, I think if your team is fighting heavily in middle, you don't want your A player to be on the A site. But triple is somewhere you can actually adjust back to once your team is kind of paused on middle a little bit, right? So if we saw from Navi initially fighting for mid quite heavily, and then they end up pivoting back into more of this type of setup where Ime is like close towards A from connector, and Bit moves in towards triple. Does he necessarily want to be here in this situation? He does need some flashes, and I'm not sure he's actually gotten any of them. Wonderful has a flash. Let's see. JL doesn't have a flash. Like, this, actually, this is kind of a problem. If JL had a flash, like JL or Ime, to flash, then Bit can peek out. I don't think Bit really wants to be here if his teammates have no flash they can throw for him quickly. Because you can't wait here forever. Eventually, they're going to swing on you, and you're just so close to the box. It's so easy to get peeked out on. And they see you, but you don't realize that they saw you. So they're like, then they end up just pre-firing you around the corner. So eventually, you do need to peek out. If I'm guessing, I think Bit probably didn't realize he wasn't going to have a flash. Maybe he even thought that Wonderful was rotating over towards A instead of rotating towards CT, because if Wonderful rotates A there, or instead of rotating towards B, because if Wonderful rotates A there, then he's got a flash for Bit, and it can be a bit awkward sometimes because you have Bit towards Ticket, and then you rotate a second player Ticket. You know, you kind of don't want 2 players at the same spot. How do you get them out of there? It can be a bit of an awkward situation. And by the way, I believe this ends up just being the Donk show in this round. Like, this is yet again, I mean, the score is about to be 8-8, right? The score is 8-8, but how many times have Spirit won a round that felt like a round where they actually controlled it? Not many, right? Not many. It really is just Donk's won a couple of rounds for Spirit, and Shiro's won a couple of rounds for Spirit. That feels like the general way this has been going. And I think that's the way this continues to go for the series, to be honest. Wonderful, peeking underpass with Yaw. If your opper wants to go for a peek, I think generally most of the time they end up being fairly unchained. It's funny, I saw that in a Liquid interview where Naf's like, oh yeah, Ultimate just likes to do his thing, we just let him do his thing, and Twist, I think it was Twist, Naf said it, and then Twist like, no, was it Yukindar? Like, Yukindar said it, and Naf was like, leaky strats, and it's like, he's like, I think everyone knows that's just how it goes, right? Like, for the most part, I think Navi is one of the teams where it seems like they do use Wonderful a bit more as a cog in the wheel, a bit more as a piece in the system, as opposed to a lot of other teams. But at the same time, if you try and control your opper too much, I think you take away their confidence, and then they end up being, struggling. But JL here, I did see this live. That is a ridiculous shot. And then I want to see this from Donk's POV. So let's look at this from Zontic's POV first. So Zontix is going to lead in. They don't want to give away any information, so they're not really using utility. That's Zontix's POV. I'd be tilted. Donk swings in. Donk knows that he can win this if he can just take the duel, but JL just doesn't give him a head to shoot at, right? Like, JL just doesn't give him the head to shoot at. Donk is like ready for this. He's looking for it. He knows JL's at a bit of a disadvantage. He can also... time is generally in Donk's favor in this situation because he can get a teammate in there as well, and Shiro could actually support potentially. So there's no real rush generally for Donk to make that play as fast as possible. He's just lining up a good shot, and he knows that if he can take a clean shot, he's gonna get the kill the vast majority of the time because he's Donk, right? But JL just absolutely destroys him. But I mean, the kill on Zontix was honestly more ridiculous, if we're being honest. Yeah. So 9-8 for Navi. Again, I mean, this time around, admittedly, JL just pulled off some heroics there. Well, I think I'm willing to accept that was an individual play from Navi. And that's the most interesting thing from Navi, because a lot of teams, especially teams like Spirit, who have so much effective, firepower coming from individual players, they lean into that firepower quite often, and they're like very, they kind of play around it. And if it doesn't happen, if it doesn't show up, then they struggle to get much done. But then you have Navi, where they lean away from their firepower. They lean into, we're going to find things that work no matter what. And this is something Device talked about before. This is something Liquid talked about when they had their run. Your A, B, and C game. Your A game is when you're hitting all your shots, you're feeling very comfortable. Your B game is where you're hitting good shots, you can play comfortably, but you're not feeling like you're about to like 180 someone, insta give them. Your C game is where you're like struggling. You're losing gun duels you normally win, you're struggling, right? And it feels like Navi play where it's like, on our C game, we can play the same way, and we're still going to be pretty effective. We're at least going to be in the game. We're never going to be completely out of it, right? And then when they have a player having an A game day, that's just like a cherry on top. That's like a bonus. Whereas like you look at a team like Spirit, and it's like, if we're on our B game or our C game, if Donk's on his C game, we are simply losing. Like, there's very little to fall back on a lot of the time. But in this case, Wonderful dies underpass. There was a double lurk underpass, so I think Wonderful is thinking, or Ime rather, is thinking there that, well, it's not that likely there's multiple players above. Usually, I think a lot of the time, if you're running one underpass, you're only running one top mid. There's a balance, of course, but I think that's a decent gamble to take, where it's like, okay, they had two underpass, there's a decent chance there's only one top middle, so I'm going to walk through this smoke. In this case, there was two top middle, but even if there was one, he didn't find the right timing, right? Unfortunately, you do have to find the right timing as well. Then, gamble stack. This is, of course, normal. And actually, Bit. So again, you do have Spirit with a relatively effective round coming out from them. They're in a pretty good spot. Bit is going to do his typical Bit things, get 2 kills on the player's rep, their bombs down, then you've got a 2v3. But the key here is that only one player gets spotted in the middle. So there's 2 players dead there, doesn't see Chopper under, and Donk is on Cat. So what are you thinking here? Well, there's a decent chance there was a 3rd player ramp that was setting up utility. That's one of the things that's often going to be happening in a situation like that. And with this little time, you wouldn't necessarily expect that Chopper would have strafed across to the other side of connector. With 2 players mid, you might expect that Chopper would have just been walking into connector on his own, but instead he crossed over. So I think the call here is that there was only one there. JL gets the kill on Zontix. Zontix is just, there's time pressure, but I think it's a tough one. I think Zontix just needs to wait a couple of seconds, but the problem is that if Zontix is too passive, then it's too easy for Navi to focus on the 2 players coming up connector, and then he has no ability to actually trade for them. So he's trying to set up so that they can swing in through connector and not have to worry about these positions here, which are some of the hardest to deal with. And they can kind of like clear this, turn around, and then worry about ramp, and then turn back, and you can clear everything sequentially, where you're not like worried about two sides at the same time, right? But that does get him caught, and he probably would have survived if he just, you know, held on for a second. But I can see the logic behind doing that. And Alexi B somehow only takes 20 damage through there. So now Alexi B spotted, but the problem here is JL could just back up and play from inside of ramp and he'd be doing pretty well, but he is convinced that there is a second player coming ramp, which if you only saw one through connector, makes perfect logical sense, right? If you think there's only one player connector, but the reality is there's two players connector, and once Chopper gets the kill on Alexi B, you'll notice, by the way, that Chopper is fighting CT, but Donk is also fighting ramp at the same time because they don't have time, right? They need to make sure that they can find where JL is. They can start moving towards the bomb. And if JL is somewhere like Tetris, they can actually trap him there. And now JL is completely trapped. There's just no way of him getting away here. And he knows he's screwed. He tries to peek out instead of just letting himself get trapped. But the reality is, you know, he gave them just enough time to actually get the double peek off. And that's the key to that he got double peeked off instead of peeking a little bit more aggressively. But the problem is your left eye peeking there from pretty close to the wall. You have a disadvantage. And at the same time, you still want to, if you can, play the timer, if you can, you know, force them to make, as the timer goes down, it's not that you necessarily think the clock is going to go to 0, but as the timer ticks down, you're thinking to yourself, they're more likely to make mistakes as the clock continues to tick down, right? So this time around, Spirit is going 4 out ramp, just dueling out ramp and saying, hey guys, if you guys don't have great weapons, which based on the money situation, it's hard to tell, actually. This is a money situation where Navi were close. They were very close to a buy. So this is a money situation where I think it really depends on how good of track Spirit was keeping on the exact weapons being purchased by Navi and the utility being thrown. It wouldn't surprise me if they expected like a buy with not the greatest weaponry, as in like a buy, but Navi don't have an op, for example, which is the type of situation that makes a ramp play like that very effective. Oftentimes you'll catch someone like Bit will be jump spotting in that situation. And Navi is a team that plays jump spotting. I think Navi plays jump spot from Ticket like more often than most teams, if I remember correctly. I did the data on this specifically, how often do each team play inside of A or outside of A. And I think Navi was more on the outside of A side of things, which makes that play, it seems like a crazy play. And I mean, look, in reality, in this situation, it turned out to not be the greatest play. But I try and, if possible, I want to give you guys the logic behind why that play isn't... Teams aren't making, in general, minus Nip Amcal, teams aren't making plays that just make no sense, you know? By the way, with this smoke... dude, I've been working on this smoke since fucking 2014, okay? Because it sucks so much that you have to have all these crazy lineups to throw a fucking jungle smoke. I just want to throw a jungle smoke on the fly. How do I throw a jungle smoke on the fly? Well, one of the main ways that I found that you could do it really effectively is you actually aim, instead of aiming at you aim at like the middle of this, and you shift walk throw as you're moving. Okay, this is such a weird thing to know. I swear to God, I've been working on this since 2014. I swear to, it's never perfectly consistent. I can't get it perfectly consistent, okay? But there's probably a better lineup from here. Maybe he's supposed to jump throw or something, although maybe you crouch jump throw might work. I don't know. I got it with a shift walk throw that it generally lands, but sometimes there's a gap. Sometimes, depending on where exactly on the ramp you throw it. But maybe they want to have a gap here. I don't think so. I'm starting to think that might not be the case. Very nice try from Shiro, actually. Very nice try from Shiro. I can't believe he doesn't get this kill on Bit. Like, his aim was, like, straight on point. He's aiming for it. Oi, oi, oi. Nice play from Bit to just not full commit. Even with an MP9, you don't need to full commit there. Unpeak, you know, put Shiro in a less comfortable situation and then repeak afterwards. That's great. Then you end up into an unfortunate situation for Spirit. The thing is, though, if they can get a kill or two for Donk, that's going to be great. You know, that's going to be optimal, you might even say. If Donk can get a kill or two, and then you have Navi on potential eco territory. And then it's 11-9, but 11-9 is very doable as long as you have your opponents on the verge of a save. Because then it's 11-10, then it's 11-11, and then you have like game on with both teams having a bye at 11-11. Which is great. So, but the problem is Donk with pistols. In this game, Donk with pistols has not been that effective. I think with rifles, Donk in this series seems to have been doing just fine. Part of the problem is that Donk he kind of gets killed with these, oftentimes with these plays from Navi. He gets caught with like that nade through the mid smoke, you know. He keeps getting caught in situations where he really doesn't have a chance. And that's the reality. That's one of the things that I talk about as like, one of the reasons I support Donk, and I feel like Donk is almost unfairly criticized at times. Not that people think he's bad, but I feel like he's unfairly criticized because every other entry fragger gets the benefit of like, he's an entry fragger. Of course he's not consistent. But it's like Donk has one bad game and you're like, Donk, bad game. He's trash. And it's like, dude, if you look at the ways Donk died in this game, look, I don't think he's on his A game. His pistols, like, I think pistols are oftentimes where your A game really shows, where you can get, you know, force these kills with deagles that are just very tough kills to get. I don't think he's been hitting shots like that necessarily, the way he might do on a good day. But at the same time, like when he has his rifle, he's still doing good. Like this might be his B game or something. Like maybe it's still his A game. He's just not quite, you know, at the top level of his A game. His riflers are still great. He's still hitting great shots. He's delivering. It's just, I think it's the pistols where he's somewhat struggled, right? It's with the deagles where he's not been creating those opportunities and hitting insane shots that actually, you know, give his team the advantage. But then you have a buy rather coming out of Spirit, but they don't have the greatest buy. I mean, they've got Donk with the AK, but look at their utility. It's not that amazing. Of course, they did throw some to try and take control of middle, but they don't have more than one flash right now. They have one flash, right? So that leaves your options fairly limited. Now, one of the things about this jump spot, by the way, from LXCB, is if you do it correctly, when you jump multiple times, you don't make noise. So, although it looks like they could hear him there, and sometimes you can kind of intuit what's going on in terms of the setup that's being played, the reality is that because he's jumping like that, and tell me in the comments, by the way, if you knew that, because I feel like this is something that, this is one of those things that I feel like everyone knows, but at the same time, I feel like it might be one of those things that people assume everyone knows, so you kind of forget that not everyone knows that, right? Yeah, so tell me if that's like new information to you or anything. But one of the things is, look at this Navi rotate. I mean, look at the situation they're in. They get bit into Palace. They were set up heavily on A. They're doing kind of what I talk about all the time. They overstack towards A. They rotate back over. Wonderful is B just in time. And that's one of the things that Navi is, it's almost like a signature for Navi, I feel like at this point. They get the rotate there just in time. It's because their timings are like very precise on exactly when they make sure these rotates happen. And here you do have JL hitting a couple of nice shots. I mean, he's expected to get one there, and they'd win the round, I think, regardless. Whether he gets one or two, I think they're probably in perfect position to win that round. But him getting two there certainly helps. And then a lot of the time in this situation, I think you're expecting this type of response back towards A. You know, mid hasn't been doing anything, and in fact, Navi, to some extent, have been allowing, in the last round especially, they kind of allowed Spirit to take all the mid control they wanted. They gave it up, and they said, look, you can spend all your utility taking mid control, then you're going to have no utility to actually take the bomb site, which is exactly the situation they were in. Then Spirit, of course, miss a window smoke. Doesn't help at all, but I don't think that necessarily makes the biggest difference, although actually it kind of does make a big difference, because when this A hit comes out, now Wonderful doesn't have to worry about Connector. He knows that Connector's empty. He knows that like maybe there's someone underpass, but they're pretty comfortable. JL can speed up his rotate a little bit, and Wonderful can be very ready to go for that peek there and get the kill. Man, I don't know. Navi is just a treat to watch, man. Navi is just like, especially the more you watch Navi, the more you understand, like, here's what they do on a standard round. And then you can see those small adjustments. Like, the only reason I knew that, that their execute was countering snack specifically was because on that nuke game that I referenced, the only reason I knew that was really like an anti-strat is because I had seen their upper exec before, and I knew that wasn't their standard upper exec. It was a slight variation of their standard upper exec. And so the more you kind of have an idea of what Navi do typically, the more you can really see what those adjustments are. And if you're ever trying to learn CS, if you're trying to learn like what is good fundamental CS, watch what Navi does. How their setups operate, their utility is flawless, and their setups are almost always like they make logical sense, and there's very small relative gaps in their setups on both T and CT side.